All right, welcome back. We are WebD6201 in the winter 2021 semester at Durham, and it's client-side scripting, week 3, some of you week 4, part 1 of our broadcast. We're going to be talking about Ecmascript 5 versus Ecmascript 6 this week, and there's lots to cover, as always. So what did we do last week? We talked about DOM manipulation. We also discussed a little bit of JavaScript events. We went over the IFI again, which is immediately invoked function expression. We discussed different ways of writing functions last week and the week before. Also variable scope and how the IFI and basically functions limit that. How we use strict and how we get JavaScript to execute in strict mode and what that means a little bit. So that's what we covered last week. A little bit also of forms and form validation, which will continue this week tomorrow. This week, what we're going to do is we're going to deploy live to Github Pages with using the .no Jekyll file. We're going to be doing that. Show you how to do that this morning. We're also going to discuss what is Ecmascript, the evolution of JavaScript, Ecmascript 5 syntax versus Ecmascript 6, OOP with Ecmascript 5 versus OOP with Ecmascript 6, splitting code over multiple files. And what's due this week? In-class exercise number 2 is due this Friday at midnight. And I've also released test 1, which is due Saturday at midnight. So you have a chance to get this done. For test 1, there are 16 questions. You'll have 15 minutes to get them all done, approximately, and you get 2 attempts. And like I said before, this is something that will allow you to look through the material, a couple of times, not just once, as well as most of it is covered in the PowerPoints and the things that I've talked about in class. There might be 1 or 2 points you have to look up, but for the most part, it's totally doable, this test. And what's due next week? Lab 1, which is your first assignment, is due February 5th at midnight. So if you haven't had a chance to partner up for this one, I recommend you do so as soon as possible so you can get your Lab 1 started and then completed. All right, so that is kind of where we are right now. We're sitting at week 3 in our schedule. And again, this week is kind of a bigger week in terms of evaluations, as you'll be getting a 2% for in-class exercise 2, as well as 7.5% up to for test number 1. So make sure that you get that done by Saturday. Again, there are no extensions for the test, as it's a test, and it'll be lasting through the entire week. You'll have the entire week to get it done. So please make sure you don't forget that. Put a reminder in your calendar or something, because it's worth 7.5% of your final grade. All right, so that is where we are right now. And before we start talking about the evolution of JavaScript, which is where we're going to go next, I want to kind of download our starter code from last week. So last week we kind of did WebD6201 ICE1B, and I want to kind of continue from in-class exercise 1B with you guys and make in-class exercise 2B, which is the one that you're going to be working on. So again, the way I would do that is I would go into the project, right, for WebD6201 ICE1B. This is from last week. And I would download the code. If you give me a second, I'll set it up for you guys so that you don't have to do all these things that I'm doing right now. And then I'll just give you a place to start for this one. So again, I'm going to download the code like normal. So I'm going to download a zip file. And this puts the zip file in my downloads folder. And what I want to do with this is I want to continue with the stuff that I've got. So I'm going to kind of copy this one, go to my desktop as an example where I have your stuff, and kind of paste it in there. So there it is. And then extract it like normal. And normally what you get is when you extract something, you get this, the name of the repository -main. Main is the branch, the main branch is what that is. All right, so we can delete this now. And what I want to do is rename this thing for me to week 3B, which is what you're going to be doing. So that is the project. I'm going to bring up Visual Studio Code now. And what I want to do with Visual Studio Code is just drag and drop it into there. And you're going to see that in VS Code, one thing we need to change is my README file. It's not for ICE1, but ICE2 and ICE2B. So that's kind of the thing we're going to be doing. The rest pretty much remain as is. And now I want to put this up on GitHub. Let's use command line to do that. So again, control backtick to pull this up. And I'll say git init, git add dot, git commit -m. And these are all the same commands, initial commit. Okay, so there we are. What did I do wrong? Git commit -m, initial commit. I didn't put enough spacing. That's okay. And then what I want to do is up online, create a new repository. So let's make a new repository. We'll name it properly, make it public. Call it WEBD6201 in the winter 2021 semester. And it's in class exercise 2B, which is you guys. Okay. Once I've got this, then I can grab the last 3 lines of code here and copy them and go back into Visual Studio Code, right click and paste and enter. And then what that'll do is it'll allow me to push everything up on GitHub. So that's kind of the same process that we've been using this whole time. All right, so if I go back to GitHub, you can see now if I refresh that I have everything there with the new README file and so on. So this is the link we're going to start from. So if I go to our in-class exercise, I'm just going to put in the link. So say GitHub link for week 3. That's the one you're going to start with. You can download from there and start from there, or if you really want to, you can create your own from last week's project that we worked on. Okay, so it's up to you how you want to do this. I'm going to use this one as I start off. Okay, remember that your in-class exercise were 2% and is due Friday at midnight. You might as well do that with me now so that you can avoid having to watch the video later. All right, so I got a couple of comments. Nicholas says, is this the same as we've been working on? Yes. Could you extend what you have and copy paste and remove the .git folder and then make a new one? Yes. I want you to make a new folder though, or new repository for every in-class exercise we do. So don't use the same repository. Michael says, when I copy and paste the last 3 lines after I create a repository, it gets an error. Okay, it really depends on how you do it, Michael. If I copy paste, if I right click, all I'm doing is that's all I need to do on the command prompt, and it'll do kind of give you the effect exactly what I just showed you. Just right click. So copy and then paste. But the only way you can do that is if you've done the first 3 lines first. So if you notice, if I make a new repository, it gives you some steering directions for the first time, and you need to do a git init, git add dot, git commit -m, and then some kind of initial message, initial commit or first commit. And then you can copy paste those last 3 lines of code and you should be fine. All right, so that is the link we're starting with for in-class exercise number 2. And now that we have this, I want to talk about this funny Node.jquery file. So I want to put my files up online live, but my biggest problem is node modules. And like I said before, where I want to put them is on GitHub Pages. So if you look at GitHub Pages, GitHub Pages is a free hosting site, if you will, or hosting process for all of your GitHub repos. In fact, for any site you want, as long as it's not a dynamic backend. So like, as long as you're not using something like a database or something like that, then you're totally good to go if you want to make a flat site for your files with GitHub Pages. So it doesn't really do databases, but it does do any kind of regular site like ours, right? So so you can make it so it's a project site, and it gives you directions on how to do it. If you go to settings and if you scroll down, you can certainly pick a theme as well. We don't want you to pick a theme because there's no need for that. You're going to make your own pages from when we upload it to GitHub. But I'll show you how to do that. So basically all you need to do is GitHub Pages is free and it's included in every single repository that you make. All right, so let me show you how that works. But what you need in order for you to do that, because GitHub has its own backend called Jekyll that serves up files and so on, we need to disable Jekyll. And the way to do that is to just add a .no Jekyll file, just like it says here in the PowerPoint slides. So right at the top it says, we need this .no Jekyll file to be included in your project. All right, so let's go back to the project. And then I'm just going to go and make a new file. I'm going to call it .no Jekyll, exactly how that's spelled. All right, so that's the one we want. So again, I want to add that in. Not a folder, a file, Tom. There we go. Why is that not a valid name? There we go. It worked. So that's how it works. So basically, .no Jekyll is an empty file, and it's the dot means it's some kind of hidden file that's inside of your folder, and it's related specifically to GitHub Pages. That's what it's for. Okay. All right. So now, once we have this, the .no Jekyll file, let's just put this up on GitHub again. So I'll say something like control backtick, and I'll say git add dot git commit -m added .no Jekyll file. No Jekyll spelled Jek, J-E-K, and then Y-L-L, right? And then git push, which should push everything up to GitHub. All right, so now that I have a no Jekyll file up on GitHub, and we can see that if I go to the GitHub repository now, if I refresh, then you can see that there is a .no Jekyll file right here. So what is the first? Okay. Git add dot git init is what you have to do first. The first to initialize your repository is git init. Okay. All right. So so now that I have my no Jekyll file up on GitHub, right? As an example, then the only thing I need to do to make this go live is I'm going to go to settings. Again, this is being recorded just in case you miss it. And if you scroll down under settings, this is for any repository, by the way. If you scroll down on settings and you keep scrolling down, you're going to come to the point where you're going to see this thing called GitHub Pages. And then all you need to do is specify which branch you're using. I'm going to use the main branch. And once I have the main branch, then click Save. And when you save it, it's done. And you might say, wait, it's done just like that? And the answer is, yeah, it is. If you scroll down again back to that area, it'll actually give you the link for the live site up on the internet. So for example, now we have durhamprogrammer.github.io/WEBD6201 winter 2021 ICE2B is the link. You guys can access it right now. So if I click on this, you can see that we're live. And that's how fast it is, guys. And we're live on the internet. So you can access the same repository. And that's how I'm going to look at your Lab 1. So that's a requirement of your Lab 1 to put it live on GitHub Pages or some other provider of your choice. All right, so I'm just trying to satisfy those requirements. Are you with me for making everything go live on GitHub? So I'll wait for a second and for you to catch up. Nicholas says X. Okay. Is it because I'm going too fast, Nicholas? You're about a minute behind. Okay. How about the rest? Mujda says no. Okay. And Andre is good. Awesome. So I got one person that's good, a couple people that are no. How about the rest of you guys? Calvin or Scott or Tom? Tom's good. Scott's good. Excellent. Yeah. So if you guys and Muzda, what is the problem that you're having? GitHub is giving an error. Okay, that's weird. So you've put everything up. The only way that you can serve up pages is if you put everything up and you added a .node Jekyll file. And remember that GitHub, in order for it to work, you've got to be showing the root of your folder. So if there's a folder within a folder, it's going to give you an error. That's the biggest problem. And the biggest problem is that it's the way we upload stuff to GitHub. So make sure, check your Visual Studio Code, and that you don't have a folder that's inside of another folder. Let's say an outer folder that says week 3 and an inner folder that says week 3 by accident somehow. All right, so that's one thing you don't want. All right, so now that we have this, and we're just gonna clear those. Let's suppose that we have this now, and let's see what this looks like locally. We can use Light Server for that, Light Server. And Light Server is just going to do similar things to what we did with our online. So notice online, and they look the exact same because, well, they kind of are, right? And this is awesome. That means, and the responsiveness is really good too from GitHub. So really good stuff. Microsoft has made it even easier for us to serve up our pages up online. Not a problem. And if you go back, you scroll back with Durham Programmer, you can take us back right to if I go to ICE2B, which is what you guys are working on, there's a couple of things you can see. One thing is, if I go to my commits, once I put things live, there's going to be a little check mark next to the commit message. So example, added .node Jekyll file, and then we have a little check mark. The check mark means that I've deployed live on GitHub Pages and everything works. If you see a little X here, a red X, that means that something went wrong. And it'll show you what went wrong if you actually track it. So if I click on the check mark, it'll say, okay, I built my pages. This is all checks have passed. GitHub Pages successfully built your stuff. You can look at the details here. If you look at the details, you can see that what's been built, what the link is for your page. And the same thing goes with this one. It's the same details, but it actually shows you the link in this case. Okay, so one shows you the details of what it is. The other one actually takes you to the link. So those are the two things that how it works. Okay. One other thing to check is once you deploy, on the right, you'll see that further down, you'll see environments will be available, and you'll see that there's GitHub Pages right here. And this little rocket ship shows that you're live right on GitHub Pages. So if I click this GitHub Pages link again, you're going to see the same things that we saw before. You're also going to see something called View Deployment. And these deployments kind of keep track of your deployment activity, right? So where your site has been deployed. So if you look at View Deployment, you can see now, again, we're back to that online site, which is pretty cool. All right, so that is GitHub Pages in all of their glory, right? I think that it's very straightforward, and that's why I recommend using GitHub Pages for your Lab 1. You can certainly use other things like Microsoft Azure or Amazon Web Services if you really want to, or Google Platform, but those are much more complicated than this. This is probably the easiest way to put your site, if it's a flat site, up on the internet. Especially if it's not a commercial site, you're not selling something on it and whatever, and you're just kind of using this as a portfolio page for your, or a link to your the stuff that you're serving up on GitHub. It's fantastic as a site. You can also include the link inside of your README file, right? So you can say live on this particular page. You can do that. README file is amazing. That you can use this for documentation. And notice that we use something called Markdown. MD is the file type. Markdown, which is very similar to HTML markup, where we can actually do, we can add headlines and links, and we can put code examples and all kinds of stuff here in the README file, which is pretty cool. So lots of stuff for free for everybody, and you know, it makes our lives a lot easier when it comes to creating little examples of your, or samples of your work. Okay, so that's what we're doing there. All right, so that takes care of that that requirement. And again, remember that for Lab 1, the requirement is to put it live. Live hosting is worth marks, so make sure that you take care of it with you and your partner, just like this, just like I showed you. Again, only one person needs to serve the GitHub pages. Okay, next, we're going to be talking a little bit about Ecmascript, what that is. I kind of talked about it in a previous session, but let's talk a little bit about the evolution of JavaScript now. So we're moving on to another topic. So really, when you think about it, this interpreted computer language was made way back, and the first browser that was implemented was called Netscape Navigator. And I remember this was in the 90s, actually, or even late 80s, that Netscape Navigator was released, right? And I know you're like, wait, 90s, 80s? Yes, it was that long ago. And back in the day, email was only available, you know, for universities and colleges. The average person didn't have an email address, or it wasn't something that was very common that we could use. And it only started really becoming popular in the 90s. And as things move forward, so it wasn't that long ago. It sounds like a long time ago, but really not that long ago in terms of technology. And anyway, so Netscape is something was our first browser, and it evolved. First of all, it's disappeared. There's no Netscape Navigator anymore, but it's disappeared, and it's gone to it kind of morphed into Firefox. Oh yeah, Ashok, it is. Sorry, one thing I forgot to do. Thank you for that reminder. Is I want to put this live on YouTube. Sorry about that. So that would be in YouTube recordings. Let me just make that happen live for you right now, if you're interested in watching it live. Sorry about that. Typically, I remember to do that little step, but I didn't do it this time. But the recording will be live anyway, and it'll be saved here on YouTube. You can always go back and watch the recording later on. Okay. And we'll have a couple of them this week, like we did last time. So I'll have one for today, and one for tomorrow. Okay. Nicholas says your site is published, but I get it 404. And it says that I don't have an index.html, but I think it's my folder structure. Probably is. Again, like I said before, your folder structure has to be such that I can see your index.html as soon as I go to your repository. If your index.html is inside of another folder, then it's not going to work. In fact, if any of your HTML site files right now are inside other folders, you won't be able to access them. Yeah, so you need to redo your folder structure, and then again, just push to GitHub, and it'll adjust everything for you, and then it'll work. All right, so going back to that then. So again, Netscape Navigator, it kind of morphed into Firefox. Over time, it evolved, and really what it was back in the day was just links and images when it first started, and then Navigator, you know, what we wanted to do, or programmers wanted to do, is implement a programming language that web browsers would understand, and so it evolved into something called JavaScript. The name JavaScript is really a bad name, right? And the reason why is because originally it was called LiveScript, but Java, the language, was really popular at the time. And what ended up happening was that someone, or maybe a consortium of people, thought that it'd be really cool, instead of calling it LiveScript, that we related to a language, a programming language like Java, and put script at the end, so that you know it's a scripting language and interpreted languages as opposed to a compiled language. So they called it JavaScript. But one thing to note is that Java and JavaScript there's no relationship really between the two of them, other than they're both C influenced. So they have curly braces, they have semicolons, they look somewhat the same in certain instances. but the way they operate is completely different. So there is no relationship. It's not like JavaScript came from Java. It's quite the, it's not true at all. It's just a name that they assigned to it at the time. So then as things evolved in 2008, Google released its Chrome browser. Again, not that long ago, 2008, when Chrome came out. And Chrome was like really new. People didn't trust it. Internet Explorer was still the main browser people were using at the time. And a variant of Netscape. And what ended up happening was, as things evolved, Chrome became more and more the de facto standard for most people. Chrome is the most used browser now in most parts of the world. But however, Firefox is right up there as well. So Firefox and Chrome, Internet Explorer, which is now, it's not called Internet Explorer anymore, is still third, I would say, with variants of, we also have our Apple browser as well, and other browsers that are up there that do the same thing. Example, DuckDuckGo, Opera, and a bunch of other types of browsers are still out there, Bolt, that provide different services and different reasons why they're being. Some of them are more private. They claim more privacy than Google, but for the most part, Google Chrome is still the de facto standard. And so that's why I'm using it in this course, because most people use Chrome. However, Chrome is different than Firefox, and there's a lot of people who use Firefox. And we noticed last week, Jackie and I noticed that some of the things that we were doing in our validation didn't quite work the same in Firefox as it did in Chrome, which is kind of weird. But we'll talk about that maybe a little bit on tomorrow. So once it evolved and this JavaScript engine came apart, this just-in-time compiling thing, it enabled other things to happen in the background. It was much faster than the backend interpreter that was originally used for Chrome, and we were able to do something awesome, which was derive the same V8 engine so that we can run JavaScript on the back end. And so eventually Node.js was created. In fact, there was a push to move away from multiple languages. I mean, think about this. We have HTML, CSS, you guys know PHP. You have to program the Apache server. You need to know some kind of SQL language, whether it's MySQL or Microsoft SQL or whatever it's going to be, right? So all these kinds of different languages to just be a web developer. And I'm not saying that that's quieted down, but there was a thought that maybe what we can do is use JavaScript everywhere. JavaScript on the front end, JavaScript in the middle, or our database, and JavaScript on the back end, Node.js. And with all that, what the idea was to make it simpler for developers to be developers on the web by knowing basically one main language that activates the web for the most part, and just HTML and CSS for presentation and structure. And so why Node.js as opposed to something like PHP? As example, PHP, the great thing about PHP is it's everywhere and it's simple. But the biggest problem with PHP is it uses multiple threading, actually, multi-threading. And even though you might think multi-threading environment is better, it's actually got a bit more of an overhead than JavaScript does, than Node.js. So when Node.js uses an event-driven system on the back end, and we'll talk more about Node.js in the second half of semester as an example, but that's what it does. It uses more of a non-blocking event-driven system for it to work on the back end. We'll talk more about that, like I said. And then, so they continue to evolve, and similar around the same time that in 2007, there were other people that were experimenting with a database. Instead of using something like a relational database like SQL Server or something like that, there were thoughts that sometimes we don't need to have a relationship for all of our data objects on the web. We might want to have a flat document type structure. And the idea of NoSQL, so a no SQL language database came about And of course, once we, kind of they discovered that JavaScript and it's using the V8 engine was out there, which made it very, very quick compared to, to what it was before, they adopted it and they created a new database structure, a NoSQL database called MongoDB, which we're going to learn about later on again this semester. And MongoDB uses a JSON-like syntax and data model. So JSON being JavaScript object notation. So there you go. You got JavaScript on the front end, on the client side, JavaScript on the database, and JavaScript on the back end with Node.js. And what that does is it creates almost like the ability for you to be a full stack developer with just knowing JavaScript as your main language. Other things came about as well. Jquery was really huge, again, back in the day because it kind of patched holes like I talked about. And we're going to learn more about Jquery next week. It patched holes in our CSS, our presentation, and also added additional little functionalities and helper libraries for JavaScript to make JavaScript easier, right? And so but it also brought about a wave of front-end JavaScript frameworks, and one of them, popular one, is Angular. Originally called AngularJS, what it used was this idea of a single page application. So you have one big page, this is the way it works, and instead of having multiple pages, I want to say this the right way, fool the user into thinking that there are multiple pages when there's actually only one. And what the advantage of this is that the loading time by you load up content through Ajax, right? So basically what you're doing is you're using a method of loading content from your server, and you're injecting the content into the content area of the page to make it feel like it's a different page, but actually it's just the same page that you're just like basically replacing the components. And we saw how we can do that with DOM manipulation last week. We can replace the entire page structure if we want with by using JavaScript. And in some ways, that's what we do with AngularJS. AngularJS, now Angular, I think it's in version 11 as of the time of this recording. And it used, in the beginning, jQuery as a base. So jQuery was the first kind of the way it kind of worked. And then afterwards, it veered away from using jQuery altogether, and now it has its own structure. There's other front-end frameworks as well, and very popular ones. React.js, if you haven't heard about it already, is probably the most popular framework at this point. Maybe kind of in contention with Angular in different applications. And there's also Vue.js, there's Svelte, there's a bunch of other front-end frameworks. And what those front-end frameworks do is it creates a responsive mobile-first front-end. Usually a lot of times you use CSS frameworks in combination with those, like Bootstrap, as well as we also use other kinds of icon frameworks like Font Awesome, or even material design with other kinds of glyphs that do the same thing as Font Awesome does. All right, so that's kind of what's in fashion, if you will, from a front-end perspective. So that's where it came from. And then what it created was this idea that we could actually separate concerns and create what we call a rich web framework. And it also gave us concepts like two-way data binding, cross-component dependency injection, and something called an MVC-based component system. MVC standing for Model View Controller, where we have the view as the pages that we serve. The controller is the logic behind the pages, JavaScript, and the model is just a class that connects with our database. Again, we separate concerns and allows different developers to work on a larger application together with, concentrating on one part of the process. And as well, on top of that, modern frameworks use test-driven development, especially when it's a larger web application, which is a different way of developing code, very different. It takes a little bit longer to do it because what you're doing is actually creating tests before you make the functions. Before the functions exist, you have to create a test to make the, to test the function. And then from the test, you make your code as opposed to making your code and then testing it. It's kind of a different way of thinking, which is very cool. And we may learn a little bit about it this semester or in other semesters. And then what kind of evolved, we evolved into this 3-tier web application structure. And a lot of one of the most popular stacks, if you will, or solution stacks. And sometimes when you hear about someone who's a full stack developer or full stack, it one of the mean stack is one of those examples. And the mean stack stands for Mongo, for MongoDB, Express, which is a middleware between Node, which is the backend, and Angular, which is a front-end framework. So Mongo, Express, Angular, Node, and you can replace Angular as a front end with some other front end, for example, React. So the MERN stack, Mongo, Express, React, and Node. You can also swap out Mongo with MySQL. So if you like to use a relational database, because that makes more sense for the application that you're creating, you can certainly swap in MySQL or Postgres or whatever, and you can swap out these letters to create a full stack that is web-driven. There's other full stacks out there as well. The AMP stack, AMP, which is Apache, MySQL, and PHP, which is a very popular stack. And it's more legacy nowadays than anything else. There's a lot more PHP, I would say, out there as a backend language than anything else. And that's because of its ease of use and how it's kind of proliferated the net everywhere. Wow, the net, that's kind of a weird way of saying it nowadays. All right, so that is the evolution of JavaScript and how it's kind of moved, not just from the front end, but into the back end. And what's happened is it's had to get better. JavaScript has been pushed to be improved over time. And so it's moved from Ecmascript 5, ES5, which is where the the standards committee, Ecmascript, remember I mentioned last week, was a kind of the standard that JavaScript is based on, and other languages too, by the way. And over years of work, kind of closer to June of 2015, Ecmascript 6 was developed. So the next version of JavaScript in 2015, that's when it came. But it was a long time before changes between Ecmascript 3 and somehow they jumped to Ecmascript 5, and then it went to Ecmascript 6, and then they started saying, we can't use this kind of naming convention because we want to continuously evolve Ecmascript every year, so let's use Ecmascript 2015. And so that's how it kind of evolved. Because June 2015 was our first real evolution, moving JavaScript into a different form, every year now you're going to see something like Ecmascript 2015, 2016, 2017. Ecmascript 2020 is the current version that's been released, and Ecmascript 2021, which will be released in probably June every year. That's when it happens. The committee comes together. Again, we'll see how it goes this year because of COVID and all that stuff, but it shouldn't be blocking because they're remote anyway. Ecmascript 2021 is probably going to be finalized sometime in the middle of the year. And every time we have a different version of Ecmascript, which is the standard that JavaScript is based on, JavaScript gains additional feature sets, all right? Other features that maybe the previous version didn't have. But what's happened is before we got to this feature set, there have been other languages that have evolved and have been developed. And one of the most popular languages that have been evolved, we're going to be talking about this semester actually, is called TypeScript. So let's go to typescriptlang.org, please. Join me on typescriptlang.org. And there's a reason why I'm bringing this up now, because we're going to use it later this semester. So here's typescriptlang.org. And I'm going to put this link on your up on our site here for our lecture so that you have access to it if you want to refer to it later. Okay, so this is TypeScript. So it would be remiss of me not to mention TypeScript. TypeScript, I would say, is probably my favorite way to use JavaScript on the web. TypeScript is JavaScript, but it's a superset of JavaScript that adds additional functionality. And before Ecmascript 6, before Ecmascript 2015, and even after Ecmascript 2015 was introduced, it took a while for JavaScript to catch up with some of the features that were introduced with TypeScript. Let me show you what I mean by that. Let's go to the playground for a second. So if you click on playground on the link here, what it will give you, and I'm just going to wipe all this out. What it will give you if you wipe out this part here is you're going to notice these kind of an online little, kind of way of writing code. And what it's going to do is it's going to convert from TypeScript, again, superset of JavaScript that adds additional features that even now JavaScript doesn't have, and into old JavaScript or even the new JavaScript. And the way to do that is if you go to where it says tsconfig, so this is the TypeScript configuration on the front on Playground. Again, I'm on typescriptlang.org. I went to Playground, wiped everything out. And if you notice, the version of TypeScript is listed here, version 4. It's evolved a great deal since the original version. And by the way, TypeScript is owned and created by Microsoft. So it's something that's well supported. And it's on the rise in terms of popularity out there from a language perspective. Why? Because TypeScript is the thing that powers Angular, which is a very popular front-end framework, as well as other frameworks. I'll let you know that I've created full games, complete web games with TypeScript, right? They've been very similar. TypeScript has a very similar syntax to something like C# in some ways because of, actually, let me take that back, because it adds typing, which is something that's missing still, in my opinion, from JavaScript. So let's go to tsconfig. And if you go to tsconfig, it talks about the language that I'm converting from. So I'm converting from TypeScript. And my target, let's choose Ecmascript 5 as an example, okay? And it says the JSX, if I was going to change the JSX module, I can choose one. We'll put none for JSX. Okay, as an example. And for the module pattern, we'll also use, let's choose CommonJS. Okay, so again, these are all the switches that we're putting up on tsconfig. TypeScript to Ecmascript 5, JSX is going to be none, module CommonJS. And these are a bunch of strict checks that TypeScript allows us to put in. What I want you to do is, just so that way there's no compatibility issues, you won't see errors come up. Let's just uncheck all of these things so that way I can explain how this all works. So I definitely want this. So I definitely want always strict. I think that's important to put in because then that's going to generate use strict on the right side. So again, think about TypeScript as a compiled language, which is different than just an interpreted language. In fact, what we say is we want to transpile from TypeScript into JavaScript. That's what I want to do. All right, so close. So now that I have this set up, and again, if you look at my tsconfig, one more time, I have lang TypeScript, target ES5, JSX none, module CommonJS, strict checks. I've unchecked everything except for always strict, and that is my configuration. Okay, now let's start typing. And I want you to imagine what it would be like to type a class, right, as an example, in another language. Let's say, for example, something like C#. It would look something like this, yeah? Class. And then we would start typing in the name of the class. And we want to make, in this case, a class called contact. So we're going to use the contact class for our contact page. And just if I just do this, just these little, 4 lines of code, what it turns into is, well, what the heck is this on the right? Does anyone recognize what this looks like on the right from our lovely people that are in class this morning? What does this look like, guys, that you've seen from the very beginning? It looks like an ugly function, but take a look from here to this. What does it look like? An iffy, exactly. And this is my underlying motive for teaching of the iffy from day one. Why? Because once we have this, the iffy is really our structure, our closure, the old way of doing classes. And the only difference between what we've done with an iffy and this is that it has a return. And it also has on the top here, it has some kind of variable that is called contact. So for example, if my class is called contact, then the iffy uses a variable that's called contact that points to it. So now there's a reference for the entire structure that's stored inside of contact. And then there's another function that's inside of contact. This is a convention. You can make this, you can call this whatever you want, by the way. but usually we make it the same name as the name of the IFE, and then we return that out. And this is like doing a constructor. So that's how this looks, and this is how TypeScript looks. So let's continue with TypeScript. I want to create a constructor with TypeScript, and the way you would do that is just type the word constructor, and then pass in whatever you want in the constructor. For our contact, we want to pass in the full name, right? And we also want to state the type. And in TypeScript, what we do is we put a colon, and after the colon, we put the type, string, okay? And then we want to also get the contact number, which will also be a string, as well as, remember the last thing we had in our contact, which is email address, which is also a string, okay? And then we want to make some curly braces happen. So again, notice that when it converts to JavaScript, the types are stripped away because JavaScript doesn't have any types. So I understand there's a lot of developers out there that don't want types with JavaScript because they want to make it fluid. They want to make it loosely typed. And the reason why they want to make it loosely typed is so this way it's more flexible than a strongly typed language. But I think the advantage of having a strongly typed language, or even turning on types, if somehow we can do that for a language, it gives us better tooling and support, which is what a lot of developers are looking for, and that's why TypeScript has become so popular. All right, so again, I've said which kind of I'm getting, and I want to develop some private instance variables. So I'll say I can use the word private. Again, in JavaScript, private doesn't exist. Just FYI. All right, private is only a tooling, almost like syntactic sugar is what we call it, that kind of flows on top of JavaScript to give us good code hinting, to say, hey, something is wrong here. You mark this as private, but actually you're using it as public. Are you sure you want to do that? And that's what TypeScript does for us. It gives us warnings and alerts, almost like a better way of doing linting, if you will. So private, and then we say, I want the M underscore, we'll call this full name, which is going to be a type string. We've seen this kind of structure before in our languages, right? M underscore contact number, which is going to be a string. And another private M underscore email address, which is also a string. And what we want to do with those, of course, is initialize them inside the constructor. So we can say that we can use the this keyword, and the this keyword refers to the class itself. There is no implicit this in JavaScript. You need to use the this keyword. So this dot, and then the name of the variable. So example would be something like, we'll start with full name. Full name is equal to full name. This dot M underscore contact number is equal to contact number. And this dot M underscore email address is equal to email address. Okay, so let's see what, this is the TypeScript version, and this is the JavaScript version. So again, now TypeScript seems to be a little longer than JavaScript, but it's actually a little bit more understandable. So if you notice that here we have some private variables. So these are instance variables, or we can also call them class variables, right? On the right, we have our constructor, right? Here's our constructor. Here's what the constructor would look like, right? And we attach M underscore full name to full name, and these are private. I've used the convention M as member variable, underscore as private. So private member variable that's called full name, that's of type string. Again, if you really want to go crazy, you can actually say full name string, but we're not going to do that. And then you might have some methods, right? So there might be some kind of methods that are down here. And the way methods look, as an example, we might have a contact name where we have some kind of methods that are associated with a contact. But one of the methods that are very popular we want to override is a public toString method. The public toString method, a lot of times what we want to do, it returns, methods can actually have a return type too, which is a string. And then what we can do is it will replace, and by the way, it says a function whose declared type is neither void nor any must return a value. So see how that does this? It gives us a code hint. Something is missing is what it's telling us, where JavaScript wouldn't complain. if we had something like this. So if I go down there, what I want to return is the name of my contact, of course, right? So I want to say return, and then full name, which is what we want. So again, we want to say full name, right? And then plus this dot full name. And then we also want plus maybe something like contact number. And then plus, we'll put on the next line, this dot contact number. We've seen that before. Plus, and then we also want email address. Plus this dot email address. And what I also want to do is maybe what we want to do is just to show it, because you can kind of put this any way you like. As an example, I want to put this return type here, but notice how it gives me an error when I do this kind of stuff, right? So this is one way of doing it. We can also use something called kind of a string interpolation here with template strings, and I'll do that in a second. But we can start like this, and then what I want is at the end of our full name, we want some kind of new line. So we can do a new line character, and we can do the same thing with our email address. There's our new line character. And if you really want to, we can add a new line character at the end by itself. So kind of a new line character. And so that gives us our toString that we're going to return. We can also make this a separate variable, and we can return the variable, but we're just going to do it again one. And notice that it does the exact same thing here on the JavaScript side. The difference is the syntax, my friends. Take a look. Public toString string. It's very, very understandable on the left-hand side. This is what old JavaScript looks like. Contact is the name of my class. Prototype, it says, hey, I want to add to the contact prototype the toString method. I want to override the toString method. The toString method is a function. Take a look at this. This is remember one way we talked about making functions, which is making a variable that points to the function. I said that this is a more popular way of doing it than named functions. So contact.prototype.toString is equal to function. And what this is saying that this function, this toString function, points to this anonymous function we created that's here, and this will override our toString method that's built into all objects in JavaScript. All right, so cool. So this is our contact class, and this is what it would look like. So curious, can we take what we have here, not the TypeScript. TypeScript is not understandable. I just want to point this out. It is not understandable by default, a TS file on the browser yet. It's not. It needs to be transpiled. We need another process to make it into JavaScript. Okay, I gotta point that out. That's the disadvantage of TypeScript. We have to have a transpiler to move it back into JavaScript. So what it's going to actually look like after it's been compiled, basically from TypeScript to JavaScript, is this. This is what it's going to end up being. However, on the front end, when we're working with it as developers, we're going to see this, which is much easier and more palatable than this. Okay, if we're working with the old Ecmascript 5. Let's use this thing. So let's copy this whole thing, and we'll go back into our code, and we'll go into our scripts, into our app.js, and just below where it says use strict, we're going to put in place our new contact, which is looking like this. Okay. Okay, and let's use our contact, right? So we made it, and it looks like it's pretty good. Let's use our contact, as an example, way down here. So inside of where we have a display contact function, which is part of what we did last week. Further down, we have an area where we have our function, our send button, and the send button, we wanted to send it to the console, but unless we prevent default behavior, once I click the send button, the console clears. So let's prevent the default behavior. Talked about doing this. Prevent default behavior prevents whatever the behavior is that we're using for that particular event. In this case, when I click on the send button, so that I have a send button, I've attached an event listener called that's of type click, the click event listener. We have attached to the send button. When the send button, because the send button is attached to the form and it's the submission button, the default behavior for the submission button of a form is to submit the form and clear it. We don't want that, so that's why we're preventing the behavior from happening. And instead of pushing out all this to the console, we don't want that. We want to make a new context. So we're going to say that let contact equal to a new contact. We need to use the new keyword to allocate memory. And then we're going to say it's listening for the full name. We're going to put in the full name dot value. We're going to continue with the contact number dot value, as well as the email address dot value. Remember, the value is the value that's being stored in the input element, right, which is full name or contact number or email address. And then what I want to do is I want to spit that out to the console. So I want to say console log, and let's do a contact.toString, because we know we have a toString method now that we've made on the contact. This will use the toString method we've defined up here, right, inside of our contact class. That's what this is. We can get rid of one of the use stricts, by the way. We don't need both of them. And this is our contact class. That's what it is, right? And what it's doing is it's going to push out our contact string the way we have it. Let's see if it works, to our console. Okay, let's test this in our JavaScript, or on the browser now. So again, we're going to go back to our browser. Let's go there, and we're going to go to where it says contact us, and let's look inside of our inspector in the console, and let's put some stuff in here. Let's use Peter Parker as our contact. His contact number is 416-555-5558, let's say, and the email address will be peter.parker@example.com. And we'll click send. Remember, send is now not going to work because we prevented default behavior. So send, and now there you go. Full name, Peter Parker, contact number, and email address. Take a look. This came from our toString method. Nice. So that's how you do object-oriented programming, and that was my underlying motive for all this in JavaScript. We create a class. We use an IFE, right? This is the classic way of doing it. By the way, I want to show you the classic way because the new way does the exact same thing that the old way does. It just hides the implementation in the background, right? Yeah, we're not using var though. Let's go back and get rid of that var. So instead of var, just replace var with let. Yeah. It clears the console because, Nick, you have to turn off the default behavior. So this prevent default behavior has got to be checked on, not uncommented. If it's commented out, like how I had it, then what's going to happen is it won't work. It will just do the default behavior, which is to clear clear everything and do it. I'm not sure why that's doing that, Nick. But it shouldn't. If you're preventing default behavior, it should just work. So that is the classes in a nutshell. But of course, this is a very old Ecmascript 5 way of doing things, and let's discuss Ecmascript 6 and how we do it in the new way of doing things that have been developed since 2015. And you're going to say that it's way better than this, or way easier, I would say, not better. But first, let's put this up on GitHub. So I'll say, just so that you have what I have, I'm just going to add another console here. And I'm going to say git add dot git commit -m, and we'll say added contact class, or we'll say ES5 contact class, and then git push, and that'll push everything up to GitHub. One thing to check is, does this work up on GitHub Pages? So now that I've made this local, this little class here, does the class work on GitHub? So let's go on GitHub and take a look. So up on GitHub, here is durhamprogrammer.github.io. I'm going to refresh. And if I go to our contact and I start doing the same thing I did locally, let's do that. So here's our contact. Then I can type in another name. Let's say Tony Stark. And again, his phone number is 416-555-5559, let's suppose, and Tony, probably Anthony, right? Anthony.stark@example.com. And if I click send, then, okay, so it did that behavior. It kind of did exactly what you're looking at, Nick, which it actually did the send behavior, right? And it's not supposed to do that. So either A, this thing didn't propagate the update yet, right? And the way to check that, by the way, is look at sources. So go to sources. This is up online manually, okay? Go to scripts, go to app.js, and see that we have the other piece in there. And you can see that clearly we don't. So this durhamprogrammer.github.io didn't get the latest changes yet. And the way to check that is if I go there and if I refresh, you can see that I have only 3 commits, right? And 3 commits, it says added ES5 contact class. Let's go back to the Durham Programmer site, make sure that we're seeing what we're seeing. Again, I'm just going to go inspect and go to sources and see if at the top of my page I have that, that functionality. And you can clearly see we don't have it yet. It's not there. So sometimes what happens is online, it's one thing to look at a page and say, okay, this is how it should be, and we have, it should be instant. We should think it's instantly transferred. But what happens is it takes time to propagate, and also, by the way, it's cached. This thing here, the contact.html page and this page itself is cached in the system, and that's why it's probably not showing up. Let's check on the actual page itself. So if I go back to the page itself to see what it looks like. So let's go back to this. And if I go to scripts and if I go to my app.js, we need to see this contact class actually work live. So to check that, we can use another browser, like for example, Firefox. So let's go that. We'll go up on live on that same link. So I'll go back and grab the link from our Durham github.io link, this one, and I'll grab the HTML. Just grab this part right here. So link to that and go back to Firefox to try that out. So boom, Firefox, and let's take a look at our page. So I'm going to go inspect element, very similar, and I can look at the console as an example that's in here. One thing to check, the way to check it is to try and do a contact in the console in Firefox. So again, I can say, let my contact equal to a new contact. And if I do that, it should allow me to put in some information. For example, something like Tom Smith, my phone number, 416, my last name is not Smith, 555-5555, and also my email address, tom@example.com. And then if I did that and press enter and then do something like my contact .tostring, I should be able to see that stuff. So you can see it's clearly working, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to create a new object of type contact. So I know it's propagated. It's just a matter of the browser cache isn't happening right now. And if I refresh, sometimes it'll refresh this. It hasn't refreshed yet. It's going to take some time. Don't worry about it, is my thought. Make sure you have a backup browser like Firefox to check with. Okay, so that's kind of how it works. And I'm pointing out that I'm talking about this out there, and the reason why I'm talking about it is because you're going to go through this heartache. You're going to try and put something up for lab number 1, and you're like, wait, it doesn't work. And the reason is, well, it does work. You just got to give it some time to propagate across, GitHub pages. It's got to update, and your browser's cached. You can try and clear the cache if you really want to, or have a second browser that doesn't have it in cache to check out. All right, so that is our contact class, and that's the old way of doing it. Let's do it the new way now with Ecmascript 2015 and beyond. So how do we use that? Let's go back to our TypeScript site. So we're going to go back to our TypeScript playground, and all we have to do to convert this into the new version of JavaScript is back into TypeScript config, tsconfig. Instead of our target being Ecmascript 5, let's choose Ecmascript 2020, which is kind of the latest version. And when we do, you're going to see that it looks very similar to what it looks like on the left. And this is where some people would argue now that, do we really need TypeScript in this kind of day and age? Because you know what, take a look here. We have our class contact and we have our class contact. We have our constructor, we have our constructor. You can see how much, this has come about. So TypeScript has still some features that the latest version of JavaScript doesn't have. For example, I can't declare any private variables. Whereas in JavaScript, here, and there's no types, like I said before, which again, I think is a boon for developers. And you can see that for the most part, all the things that we have here are the same as over here. One thing we can do is in the latest version of JavaScript, we can use something called template strings. So let's suppose instead of using a return type of this, we can use the backtick character. And what we can do is we can kind of add in our type in here. So we can say something like, as an example, when we interpolate this dot m underscore full name. If we try to do this, now notice it doesn't light up. And one of the reasons why is you want to kind of make a template string that's proper, right? So template strings, typically what they would look at like in C# would be something like this, right? And this is kind of string interpolation. Let's take a look at string interpolation with template strings in JavaScript. So if I look at template strings in JavaScript, right? If you look that up, and if you go to developer.mozilla.org, it's a very popular place to look for a lot of stuff. It'll show you how it works. So here's what we need. So $, curly brace, not back thing, which I was thinking about. Sorry, mixing up languages. So let's go back and put that $sign in there. Notice how it lights up. It becomes something that looks different. And why do I want this? Because then I could simply do something that looks like this, full name. And then I can, this is what the template in interpolation would look like. And then I can put in the \n like normal, right? And then my $, curly brace for the next thing that I want, which is contact number, right? As an example, so I can say something like \n contact number. So this is one big template string. I can also, by the way, put it on different lines, no problem. So let's say, for example, I want this to be contact number. I can start thinking about how this would format properly. So I can do something that looks like this, right? So this dot m underscore contact number. I'm just showing you the difference here, and I'll erase the bottom stuff in a second. And \n, and then email address. We can make that kind of all in line, right? And it makes it easier for us, right? m underscore email address. So these template strings are available in Ecmascript 2015, 2016, and so on. And notice it retains everything on the right-hand side, right? Including the \n, right? So one thing to note is if I convert it back, so this is the new way of doing things with template strings, right? But if I convert it back to Ecmascript 5, then what it does is it converts the template string back to what we saw before. Take a look. It's exactly what we did before with a bunch of spaces. So space and then, so it's not exactly the same, right? And we're going to see that what this effect is because this is the output, right, at the end of the day, right? So let us, and we'll see if we even need template strings at all in a second. But notice how nice this looks, right? So let's go back to Ecmascript 2020 for a second. And let's grab this now, this whole thing. After we push everything up to GitHub, we have the old way of doing it. Let's grab this new way, copy it, and put it in our code instead. So we're going to go back into here, and we're going to choose our app.js and replace the contact class here with the new contact class that we have here. We don't need to use strict. We can get rid of that. But we have our contact class that's right here. Take a look. That looks a lot nicer than it did before, yeah? And if I save it as an example, let's test it locally first to make sure it works. So again, I'm going to go locally. So into my contact, you can see that this is localhost 3000. If I refresh, I can see that that's changed. Let's put another, name in there. So Bruce Banner, right? And his phone number is 416-555-5550. And let's suppose it's bruce.banner@example.com. And I click send. Then you see something that is not exactly what we expected. We get these extra spaces and it's not what we wanted. Why is that? Because what we've done is we've added a space here. So it retained the space, as well as the extra \n. So let's get rid of the extra \n, right? And let's try it again. So we'll say Bruce Banner one more time, 416-555-5550. Bruce.banner@example.com, send, and now we have what we wanted, but we have all this extra space in the front because template strings, what happens is it's like, wait, you put us on the next line, but you've also added extra spaces because that's what we did here. This extra space is actually counted. So what we can do is we can just delete it. And then delete this extra space, right? So two ways to do this. We can delete the extra space and do this, or we can put it on one line like we've done in the past. So we can say, we can put in the \n there, right? So \n, we can put that in there. And notice that \n becomes a colored character. And we can do that here too. So \n. So we can have it on one line like this, one big line, which kind of makes sense. A little bit more difficult to read. One good thing is we put it first on multiple lines, space it out so it's formatted properly, and then we can put it out there. So again, if I want to do it one more time, we'll use Bruce Banner one more time. Contact number. Okay, and when we send it, you can see now that it's formatted properly. Okay, so kind of cool. And that is your contact class. So way better. Let's put this up on GitHub. So we'll say git add .git commit -m, and we'll say converted contact class to ES62020, which is what we've done. Git push. And that'll push everything up to GitHub for you so you can see it. All right, questions for you guys now before I move on, because I've talked about a bunch of things. I've talked about Typescript and how it's great as a templating tool, which is what we're using it for. So here's our class. We can convert it to whatever we want on the right side. We don't have to actually do this. We can't use Typescript in the browser because .ts files are not supported. Later on this semester, we'll set it up so that it transpiles automatically for you. It's not that difficult to do, right? We'll set that up. And we'll make sure you use Typescript in your code, right? And then here is our class, which is a JavaScript 2020 version. So Ecmascript 2020 version of a class. It looks very similar to what we're used to. All right. Let's do one more thing before we stop with this class. I want to add some getters and setters, which is something that we do a lot with properties. So this is instance variables, but OOP, the way it works, remember, is private instance variables and public properties. Let's do the public properties now. So again, we can do the way the properties work in Typescript is you use get, and then the name of the property. So it's, for example, full name, right, as an example. And then it returns a value, so string. And then we want to return this.m underscore full name. So that is the way it's done. And then let's do the same thing for set. So we use the keyword set and we say set full name, same property. And we don't have a return type for the setter. Actually, the return is void, if you want to be clear. And what we want then, and actually we shouldn't put void at all. That's the standard. We don't put void. We need to pass in a type or something. So our full name is going to have a new name. So some kind of value. which is a string. And again, if you're going to put a return type, the return type is void, but we don't need that typically because it'll error out with setters. And then inside there, we put in that this.m underscore full name. This is something you've seen before, is equal to value, where value is not a keyword. You can make value whatever word you want, okay? So this is what the version is on Ecmascript 2015 or 2020. It's the exact same. This is the way you do getters and setters. And let's do the same thing for the other ones. So we'll grab the other ones too, and we'll set them up. So we'll set some getters and setters up for not just full name, but for contact number. Okay, as well as for email address. So that way you can have getters and setters as well. And again, remember the use of getters and setters. You might say, what do I need them for? Well, because they're a function that you can do other things inside of, which is way more useful than directly accessing our private variables, right? Because you can do a lot like logging. You can change a lot of stuff here where you can't do that with direct access. Direct access, just access the object. Here, what you can do is a lot more stuff. So there we've added our getters and setters. Okay. And for a complete list of functions and everything else in examples, handbook for TypeScript is something we're going to look at in a second. But now what I want to do is I've done everything here as normal. I just want to grab these getters and setters and lift them from here, from online, and put them in our code. So go back to our code and go into our contact, and after our constructor and before our methods, or sorry, before our constructor, I want to put these getters and setters. And if I put that in there, you can see that they go in. Nice, nice. And by the way, if you're worried about formatting, we can always just choose to get the entire class. So from here to here, and we can right click and use format selection to format the selection exactly as it would do with Prettier, which is what we're using the format with. Okay. If you don't like this, and if you like your curly braces underneath each other like I do, you always go back and adjust that. I like curly braces on top of each other. Again, it's just easier to debug than it is to, although it does take a little bit more room than curly braces on the same line as the header. I like this way much more because then I can replace the header with something else. I can just remove this header and change something in there, and it won't disrupt the block of code, the code block that comes after it. All right, so that's why I use it. All right, so now that I have getters and setters, what are the difference between getters and setters and where it says this dot and whatever? And by the way, notice that when I declared a property or a variable in JavaScript, I never had a declaration. I never use let or var or anything in the class. And so how the heck does this happen? Well, one thing to note in JavaScript is if I have a class or object, and if I use this keyword, and then I assign something to it, as soon as I assigned a value to something that's after the this keyword, what it does is it creates the instance immediately. That's the way I can declare a new object, a new property, or let's call it a private instance, right? Or a class property. I do this dot, and then once I assign something, and then it kind of interpolates what full name is. We know that full name is probably a string, but notice it says full name is of type any, because JavaScript doesn't know what it is and it doesn't care. Full name could be a number, it could be a string, it could be an array, it could be another function. It doesn't care. And that's why it doesn't declare what this is. And this is the negative part of JavaScript, even now, right? And also for some people, the positive, because it's so flexible in terms of its way of doing things. You can do a lot of little tricks with JavaScript that you can't do in other languages. Okay, so this is cool. I've got my full name and stuff. So how do I use full name, and how does this make sense? So if I go back to our page here, and if I refresh just to make sure, And if I start typing a class, let's say, for example, if I say let contact equal to a new contact, and it remembers some of my examples before, let's just type in something else, like, for example, my full name is Stephen Strange here, and my contact number is 416-555-5557, and my email address is drstrange@example.com, and then I kind of enter. Here's my contact. So I can say contact dot, and you can see now that I can do m_contact number, email address, and full name, but I also get these, which is my full name, which is a property, and it makes more sense. It looks nicer for me. I can also set full name. So I can say full name is equal to, let's say I can change it to Dr. Strange. And we'll usually spell it like this, Dr. Strange, right? And I can do that. And if I look at the contact again, you can see that I have that full name has now been changed, but so has full name, the property. So it's pretty cool, right? And that's how classes work. Classes are a little different. One thing to note about classes, and we're going to hit them again later on this semester, is that Ecmascript 6 and beyond, and even JavaScript classes, they don't use something called classical inheritance. Instead, what they use is they use a prototype. The prototype is what we've seen before with that old type of class structure, where it says my object name dot prototype dot, and then the name of my method equals to some kind of anonymous function. We need to use the prototype keyword in order for us to put that out there. And if I inspect the contact, so if I open this up, this contact, once I put it up on the console, so let's do that properly now. So I'm going to actually do it here. So say, kind of like Stephen Strange. Hear me out for a second. And if I put, Dr. Strange at example.com and click send, now what I'm going to get is this. This is the toString method, right? But what if I print out in my my display, instead of printing out just the toString, let's just print out, as an example, the contact itself. So the whole contact object. All right, let's see what that object looks like when we inspect it. So again, if I do that again, let's put my name this time with all these superheroes. And let's just say this is my email address, right? And if I click send, now you're going to see contact. And if I open up contact here, you're going to see that I have my full name. I also have contact number, email address, and full name as properties. Take a look at these property getters, right? Right, this is kind of cool. As well as there's something called proto at the bottom with an object. So if I open this up, you're going to see that the proto is the prototype, And the prototype is what we're looking at. Okay, so prototype shows you the contact number, the email address, the full name, the constructor, which is here, and what it takes, and so on. And if we keep on going down the rabbit hole, right, if I go to proto again, you can see that I keep further going down into proto means prototype, and that's kind of like the structure of all classes. So there's a lot going on in the background that we're not seeing with the new class structure. And this is why it's good to know about the old class structure. All right, let's put this up on GitHub. So we now have properties. So let's do that. So we're going to go to here, and we're going to say control backtick, git add dot, git commit -m, and we'll say added public properties to contact class. Git push. Okay, so this is cool. I've got my public properties I've added to my contact class. That's great. And now my program is getting really long, right? Really, really long. And like I've got like a lot of stuff in here in one piece of code. I've got like a class, and I've got some other stuff. And it would be really nice if we could put this in its own file. Let's do that. So under scripts, we're going to click on scripts. We're going to click on a new file, and we're just going to call it contact.js. And under contact.js, I just want to grab everything that's in my contact class, this whole thing, all the way down to the bottom. I cut it out, not including the use strict. I'll put that over there too in a second. Here's my contact class. And I want to go back to my app and grab this and this, but let's just grab this first. So I'll grab this little comment. Contact class, right? And we'll also grab use strict and we'll include it in my contact class because I want to include it in every file so that every file has this as part of it. You don't have to. I just, as a habit, I do it. And now you'd be forgiven to think that everything is going to work nice like this. But I want to tell you that app.js has no knowledge of contact.js. Contact.js might be in our project structure, but we haven't referenced it in any way. So if I was to run it this way by splitting it across two different files like this, and I go back up to our site, so let's go to contact, save it, everything's saved. And if I go back up to my site here and I refresh and I try that again, so if I go to, let's say, Tom Smith, and I put in my contact number, and then tom@example.com, you're going to see that I'm going to get an error like this. And the reason why it says that, hey, contact is not defined. Wait a minute, but I made it. I put it inside my contact class. Yeah, but there's no knowledge. App.js has no knowledge of the contact class anymore. It's not in the same file. And remember how JavaScript and everything works. In my contact.html file, which is where I'm getting everything, it's reading line by line and it's interpreting. Remember that the browser is an interpreter. It interprets each of the lines as a directive, a command, right? And it does stuff to the content that we give it. So it's reading. It gets all the way down to, where we get to our line 95 in our contact.html file. And it says, hey, include app.js. So it injects app.js inside of the browser cache, but not contact.js. Contact.js is not even included at all. Nowhere is it been referenced. And because of that, it does not exist. In order for us to reference it, we need to add another line in here to reference our contact. So we have to say script source. And we want to put it before our app.js because we want app.js to reference it, to be able to access it. /scripts/contact.js. That's how you add another file. And now we're only adding it to our contact HTML because it's only relevant to our contact class, our contact form, not anywhere else. Why would I want to load additional JavaScript, right, as an example, for every class? Why don't I just load it for just my contact class? We're going to talk about that later on, the advantages and disadvantages of doing this. For now, though, let's split it across two files, save it, and then when I go back to my browser, and if I refresh, and if I type in the same stuff again, so I say Tom, and then Tom@example.com and click send, you can see now we're good. We still have that whole, all the details that we had. Let's go back and fix that problem in my app.js. So in my app.js, what I want to do is go down in here and put it back so that we say contact.toString, so that we have the toString method that pumps out our contact. And that, my friends, is an example of how we're going to split our classes amongst different files instead of having everything in one big file. It doesn't make any sense, right? Because it becomes unruly and we're doing multiple things at the same time. In fact, one could argue that everything should be a class, right? For example, this switch case is the only thing we could argue that should be inside of my app.js, and each one of these things would be me instantiating a new object of type home, of type about, of type project, of type services, of type contact. And each of the objects is going to encapsulate the JavaScript that I'm going to use for my entire page. Not a bad idea. More complex, and there's lots for us to go before we get there. But then all we wouldn't even have all this stuff here. This would be encapsulated in another page altogether, which makes sense, which means that every page is only going to load the JavaScript that it needs. as opposed to like more code. The more code we load, the longer the page load takes, and it has a higher chance of errors. Okay, so that's how you want to make it work. Let's put this up on GitHub as an example of splitting across multiple files. So again, control backtick, we'll say git add dot, git commit -n, and we'll say split contact class across multiple files. Or, yeah, sure. We know what it means. Right. Questions around this? I know that you may have fallen behind a little bit because I went fairly quick this time around. But I wanted to talk about this because from a structure perspective is what I wanted to kind of hit really with you, more of a structure than anything else. And why is that? Because again, let's think about this, the steps we took. So we went up on TypeScript just as a playground to play around, and we made a class. All right. The class on the left is something that we can probably feel comfortable with because of the typing. I mean, the typing looks a little different than what we're used to, but we have some keywords that we've seen before, private and so on. And we're using this. Notice that there's no iffy for the class anymore. It doesn't use that. It uses a class structure like this, which is fairly recognizable and something that we understand. Okay. For more information about TypeScript, please see the handbook. There's some great stuff here about how to do classes in TypeScript and everything else. It gives you examples about how to do that. It talks about inheritance, how this works. Notice that when we inherit, as an example from an animal class, we use the extends keyword. And by the way, if you look at our PowerPoint, stuff in here, if you look down to where it says classes in the PowerPoint slides, it does the exact same thing. So here's an example. We have a vehicle in the PowerPoint slides. We have a constructor with wheels. This is the new way of doing JavaScript. And now we have a car that extends the vehicle, which is an example of inheritance. This is how you would do inheritance in JavaScript. We use the extends keyword. Okay, that's all we do. And we extend everything. One thing to note is when we extend something or we use inheritance, we also must call the superclass constructor. We must call the superclass constructor. So example, wheels, the constructor that takes wheels must be satisfied in order for our constructor to function, right? Otherwise we'll have an error. So if I take a color is the color of the car, but we need to pass in how many wheels this car class has. And most cars that I know have 4 wheels. Some of them have 3 in other countries. But for the most part, it's 4 wheels, so it satisfies the constructor for the vehicle class. Okay, so notice that this is very similar to what we've seen in the past, right? In terms of the way we do stuff, right? And that is the only difference is the extends keyword. So, and here it is in TypeScript. So TypeScript is not something completely new. TypeScript is JavaScript, but it's a superset of JavaScript. It's something that adds things to JavaScript to make creating or working with JavaScript easier. And I find that working with TypeScript, you can create whole web applications, like I said, and you have great tooling and support to let you know that you did something wrong. Here's some more examples that they've talked about here. One thing that JavaScript doesn't have is enumerations, and we're going to talk more about this. In TypeScript, an enumeration looks something like this, like we're used to in other languages. But if I was to take this enumeration and carry it forward in our playground, let's go back to our playground, and let's suppose that I want to put an enum above my class. So something like over here, put that in. You're going to see that even in the latest version of JavaScript, it just doesn't convert. So that's something that's missing in our JavaScript right now, our JavaScript 2020. There are no enumerations. We can create an enumeration-like structure by using associations, an associated array, all right, which is what we're doing here. So on the right-hand side, we have a couple things here. One, we have an iffy. This is the iffy right here, all right? Back to iffies again. And because iffies are so powerful. And what you can see is we have this variable called direction. And what we want in here is direction is carried into our iffy. And what we're doing is we're making a brand new associative array called direction. And associative arrays in JavaScript is, instead of giving an index that's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what you can do is give it a string. You can give it a string. So, and this is what this is doing. We're creating an associative array. And what we're saying is we're giving it a value, right? Up, down, left, and right, which is what we've done up here. And those up, down, left, and right values is something that we're holding inside of our associative array. And so it does the exact same thing. Okay, but you can see how it's still quite ugly to do this with enums. And that's why, again, TypeScript exists to fill in the gaps, to make our lives easier, and to get stuff done the way we're used to in other languages, right, on the web. So this is something that's missing from the new stuff. So if I go back to the handbook as an example, so enums is one thing. It also handles things like generics. Generics would be something like templates in C++, or generics in C# or in Java, right? So that's how it would work. And it handles generics with these kind of things. And this is totally cool. But the way it does this is pretty ugly, I have to say, in JavaScript. So again, TypeScript has some great functionality that doesn't exist, and it does that by writing these little filler functions on the JavaScript side. So to make it work, it looks like it, but we get the illusion that it's happening on the front end, whereas in the back end, it's some ugly JavaScript that's been used to kind of make it so that some of this functionality works. Okay, so lots and lots of stuff here. I invite you to take a look at this. We're going to explore this more later this semester. All right, any questions at all around classes and objects? We haven't talked about arrow functions. We'll talk about that tomorrow a little bit, and we'll finish off our in-class exercise. So for today, all we have is we've made a class just to follow up. We've stored it inside of its own file, and we're now able to use it as an example in kind of a the same structure or the same kind of thing that you're used to, maybe in some other languages. Again, so any questions for the people in class right now? Here's another question for you guys in class. Are you with me? Were you able to do what I did with the JavaScript and everything else? And how do you feel? Are you feeling more comfortable with the idea of using classes in JavaScript as opposed to, let's say, before? Did you know what they were before? How they were functioning? They're pretty ugly, right? And if you did it the old way, right? But the new way, I think, is pretty straightforward. I don't think it's like too out of whack, right? You get an error when drop my files. So unable to access GitHub, requested URL returns 403. And is this when you put it up on a GitHub Pages, or is that what it is? Okay, Michael, we'll see if I can handle that after I'll stop recording and we'll do that together. All right, so if there's no other questions, that's it for today. I'm so sorry, Hamuzda. I know that's why I put the YouTube recording on, so you can always pause me and go back and fix it. Again, for the in-class exercise, this is part 1. The part 2 is going to come tomorrow when we add additional things in the contacts. We're going to do some validation with our contact class and our contact form, which is going to help you with your lab 1, which is what I want to do. Okay. Otherwise, that's it for me today. I'm going to stop recording now on YouTube, and I'll go and take questions locally from some of the people in class. See you tomorrow for the people that are watching. All right, we're not recording anymore, and now